Hey everybody, I'm Jason Huerkamp with living in Minneapolis, Minnesota and Keller Williams Preferred Realty. And today I'm sitting here with Andy Geckler, and Andy owns Everest Home Inspections. Today we're going to be talking about everything inspection related. You can get a hold of either of us in the comments down below. You can shoot us a text message or give us an email, and let's get into talking about everything inspections. All right, Andy, why don't I have you introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about your background, how long you've been in the home inspection business and what you did before that.
Yeah, so have been in the home inspection business since 2016.
Okay.
Prior to that, I was in construction. Started out in new construction, and then from new construction, worked in remodeling for a number of years, and then decided I wanted to kind of start my own business. And I'll be honest with you, being 40 and starting a construction job does not sound like fun. Checked into what home inspections entailed, thought that might be a good fit for me, and kind of the rest is history from there.
The rest is history. So you've been doing home inspections for how long now?
9 years.
9 years, wow. Okay, awesome. Let's maybe start off by talking about the various types of home inspections that there are, and maybe we'll go from quickest to the longest. So ultimately, probably the quickest one that you would do would be like a radon inspection, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's quick for us.
Yep.
But it does take 2 days to get the actual results.
What is radon?
So radon is a radioactive gas. It is a byproduct of the decomposition of radium.
Okay.
It comes up through the soil and can get into a basement through any cracks or penetrations, and it is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States.
Sure, and it's fairly prevalent, at least in our part of Minnesota.
In Minnesota, the state says that about 40% of homes have high radon levels.
Yeah, I mean, even I know with my personal house, I think we had, they measured in a measurement called picoliters, right?
It's picocuries per liter.
Okay, yep. And I think my house was, the maximum that it can be according to the EPA is like 4, and mine was actually like 19. So even though I had everything sealed and everything, we still had a major issue. So we had to put in a radon abatement system. I know your company doesn't do any abatement systems, but typically with those abatement systems, you're seeing them come in somewhere between $2,000, $3,000 is what you can do for an average home, right?
I would say that's probably for a fairly average house. You're going to be between $2,000 to $3,000 when it's all said and done. Okay.
So radon is kind of like the first inspection that you would do. Maybe not you would do, but it's one of the inspections you could do. What would be like another inspection that you'd have?
We have some customers who maybe they're buying a house, it's a tough market, and they're in a multiple offer situation.
Okay.
They may have us come in before they put in their offer just to do a quick major component inspection.
So like a pre-inspection, you might actually do that while they're there?
Correct.
Yep.
And typically that's about a 45-minute inspection where we're just kind of looking, what kind of condition is the roof in? How old's the furnace? Is it working okay? What's the electrical panel look like? So that would be a type of inspection we occasionally do depending on the market conditions.
So another inspection you probably would do would be like a sewer line inspection, right?
Correct.
You do those quite a bit. You probably want to do those almost on any home, right? It doesn't really matter the age. It's always a good idea to do them. I've even seen it where, we've had a brand new house, there's a rock sitting on top of the pipe, they did the final back grading on the house, that rock smushed the pipe, it cracked the pipe, and you would be like, oh, it's a brand new house, there's no way the sewer line's bad, but it actually could be bad.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it does happen. So, I mean, obviously a sewer issue is more prevalent in older homes, but it literally could happen in brand new houses, and has happened in brand new houses where there's a sewer line issue. With sewer lines, you could have cracked pipes, you could have roots that are causing obstructions. You could have, we've come across things where there's obstructions just because they were doing construction in a house to rehab it. And a subcontractor decides to dump stuff into the sewer drain that he shouldn't.
Oh, wow.
And have caused blockages because of that.
Yeah, and they can get fairly expensive, especially like older homes in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Richfield, Bloomington. They're prevalent to having the type of material that they used was clay, or they used something called, what was the other one? It was like orange
Orangeburg.
Right? Which is basically like a fancy thing for a bunch of cardboard covered in. I mean, it's almost like a paper mache project,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, because a lot of that was actually used during the war, right?
Correct.
You know, and like we're talking World War II, right? So a lot of it was used and installed like during the World War II time period, and it just wasn't the right product to
Correct.
use. It was used out of necessity
Exactly.
more than practicality of what actually would function. So the problem is you get like a lot of these trees and stuff, and they're like they want nutrients, and nutrients, believe it or not, can be the stuff that's going in the sewage pipe.
Exactly.
And so they're trying to get after the water, and then they're trying to really get after what we would call fertilizer ultimately,
Correct.
right? So, so from there, you also could do like a well and septic test. I know you guys don't do well and septic tests, but water test probably is in combination of those two. So you could do the water, well, and septic.
Yep.
Do you guys do water tests?
We do water tests.
Okay.
So typically, if there's a well water system for drinking water, there's 4 most common things to test for are going to be coliform, nitrates, arsenic, and lead. Some lenders require a water test be done on well. So we can test for any of the 4. We can test for other contaminants that can also be found in water beyond those 4 as well.
And typically lenders that require some sort of testing like that, it's usually like a VA or USDA, right?
Correct.
It's not going to be your typical conventional loan that wants that. It's going to be some sort of a Govy loan, usually not FHA though, right? It's usually VA or
Most
USDA.
commonly, yep.
Yeah. From there, as far as like the well and septic go, obviously you guys don't do well and septics, right?
Correct.
Yep. So you recommend like a third party provider for people to do that. And that's pretty important to get the well and the septic looked at, specifically with the septics, right? Because what would you say, like when should a septic be looked at? Your answer is probably always, but is there like a typical time frame of how old it is that you should say it should be looked at sooner than later?
Yeah, so typically, if a septic's starting to get, say, 20 years plus, definitely should be looked at. Yeah. Some counties are going to require, when there's a property transfer, that it be inspected.
Yep.
So depending on where a house is located, sometimes it's required. But definitely if it's getting 20 years, you should definitely have it inspected.
Yep. And I mean, they get fairly expensive too. Like I've seen some bills recently, like $35,000 to $45,000 is typically what you're going to spend on a septic system for a house.
Correct.
That's just your normal like 3 to 5 bedroom house. They get really expensive really fast. And I would say if you don't see a mound system at the house, and you'll know what it means because it's literally a mound, right?
Correct.
If it's the old drain field, more than likely they're non-compliant. I mean, I've seen some that are, but very few and far between. It's probably less than 5% of them.
Yes, I would say it's definitely probably less than 5%. The only exception when you're not having to do a mound in a new system is if you are in an area that has extremely sandy soil.
Yeah. Yep, and I've seen that too, right? Because that soil can actually help with the percolation of the stuff that's in there. But you get any sort of clay or black dirt, and you're going to really run into trouble.
Correct.
So with the well and the septic test, obviously we're going to refer it to somebody else. And wells can be pretty expensive too, but typically what goes wrong with the well for the most part is the pumps,
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And those, what would you say price ranges for those pumps to get replaced?
By the time you replace the pump, you're probably $2,000.
Yeah, pretty easily, huh? Yep. No, awesome. Next, we have some, especially with a lot of the older homes in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Bloomington, Richfield. You'll see stucco homes, right?
Correct.
But there's kind of 2 types of stucco homes, right? You have the old stucco that was really like actual concrete material, and
Correct.
then you had like the new stuff, which is really ephes, right?
Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about both of them?
Yeah. So
and sorry to stop you, but do you guys actually do stucco testing?
We do.
Okay, you do. Okay,
yeah.
awesome.
So basically, when it comes to stucco testing, what we're doing is we're testing the moisture levels behind the stucco. What we're wanting to find out is, when we're doing an invasive moisture test for stucco, we're drilling holes in the stucco in the areas where we're most likely to see high moisture levels. Window corners, joints in windows, flashing, where roofs meet walls, that kind of stuff. Those are the spots that we're checking. We're going to drill a couple holes in the stucco, stick a probe into it, and the probe does two things. One, it tells us how much resistance we're seeing as we push the probe in to let us know the general condition of the sheathing.
Sure.
If when we stick the probe in, it just goes right in really easy, and we can't feel the resistance from your sheathing, there's a good chance the sheathing is deteriorated. The other thing is it's giving us moisture readings to let us know how the moisture level in the sheathing compares with what we would expect it to be.
Okay, sure. And so talk about old stucco versus new stucco, right?
Yeah.
Because like the ephes was really used maybe mid 90s forward, including right now.
Yep.
And the old stucco is usually probably used before 1990
Correct.
back. So are you seeing more issues with old stucco or new stucco?
Yeah, so it's a combination of a couple different things. Really, the areas of time that had the stucco issues would have been, say, from 1990 to 2005.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it comes down to a few things. One, the overall envelope of the house became tighter.
Tight, right? Because they wrapped it in Tyvek,
Yep.
Yep.
It became tighter, and honestly, during that time frame, a lot of contractors weren't doing a great job of flashing and creating ways for moisture that might get behind the stucco to come out.
Yeah.
So between making the houses tighter, not doing a good job flashing, that's really where we came into having issues. Okay. So today, the way things are done, a new construction stucco home is going to be much less prevalent to have issues than it would have in that 1990 to 2005.
You're basically saying we learned from our past mistakes.
Oh yeah,
Right,
we
right.
definitely learned.
There's actually cases that I've seen where like some insurance companies won't even insure the property, or they'll say any damage as a result of the stucco will make it so that they're not going to cover any of that,
Correct.
right? Like what's the worst case scenario that you've personally seen with the new stucco?
So, I mean, if we go back to that time frame from 1990s to 2005, I mean, literally where there were houses where the repair bills were running in the $300,000-$400,000 range to rip off the stucco. Oftentimes it meant replacing the sheathing. Sometimes it even meant having to replace drywall on the inside, depending how bad it was.
Taking the studs out and
Correct.
actually replacing the drywall on the inside, right?
Correct.
Yeah, no, I've personally had clients that if they didn't have the stucco inspection, they would have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. We actually had a client, I think, before you were doing, the stucco inspections yourself, you actually recommended that we get a stucco inspection done. This was a property up in North Oaks, and you had done the general home inspection,
Yep.
and there was none of the telltale signs to the stucco, right? There was no black lines on any
Yep.
of it. There was, there's not any cracking or so forth. We had the inspection done on that stucco, and I think the bids came in anywhere between like $175,000 and $400,000. I mean, it was a substantial house, but still.
Right.
And the bids all said, though, too, there was an asterisk on all of them that said, we might not know. It might be way more than that, which is
Right.
just crazy to me that it can
Correct.
be that high. If you have a stucco house, especially one that was built after 1990, I mean,
Correct.
we're just giving just general guidelines. It's always good to have everything looked at by a professional, especially now when we get into these more competitive bidding situations where sometimes buyers, in order to win, are willing to forego the inspection.
Right.
At very least, though, they should probably do, a pre-inspection if possible with somebody
Correct.
like you to make sure that they're just not just like hanging out in the wind, flapping in the breeze, because
Correct.
you can have some major issues with that. So we've talked about most of the general inspections now. Your main bread and butter is doing an overall whole home inspection. Can
Yep.
you tell us a little bit about what that entails, and then maybe we'll dissect it piece by piece.
Sure. So a general home inspection is going to entail taking a look at the roof. It's going to entail looking up in the attic, checking roof sheathing, checking the amount of insulation you have, bath fans. Inside the house, checking electrical outlets to make sure they're wired correctly, checking for GFCI protection, electrical panel, checking out the furnace, looking for signs of moisture intrusion and leaks, checking plumbing fixtures, checking kitchen appliances, laundry appliances, if there's a fireplace, gas fireplaces, to make sure it's working. The wood burning fireplaces, checking out the hearth, the firebox, the damper door, checking garage door openers, safety reverse functions, checking the siding, the grade of the house. I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of houses that have
Negative pitch?
exactly.
Yeah, and what we mean by that is actually the grading. If the house is here, I mean, the grading really should go like this, and there's sometimes where you have, the grading go like that.
Right.
Especially if they have like a hill in the backyard, things like that. I mean, you have to be very careful, right?
Right. And grading is really important, especially in Minnesota where we have basements.
Yeah.
A lot of basement water issues can be alleviated with having good drainage around your house.
Yeah, and it might not just be the grading. Ultimately, it's getting a good set of gutters on it
Yep.
that have leaf guard on them that aren't clogged and things like that, especially if you have trees that are near, and potentially even running some heat tape in those gutters to make sure that even the winter months that
Correct.
they flow through and so forth. Let's kind of dissect the general home inspection a little bit. Let's start on the outside looking in, right? To me, one of the very first things that I see in a home is the driveway. Can we talk about maybe some driveway issues that we see and things like that?
Yeah. So obviously, when you have a driveway in Minnesota, especially with our extreme temperatures, there's going to be some cracking in most driveways. But then it's also something that I see frequently is settling up in front of the garage.
Sure, around the apron area, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Something like that can seem small, but at the same time, if it's never addressed, it can cause some issues.
Yeah.
I've seen garage foundation walls get fairly deteriorated when they've had
bad apron up front, right?
Correct.
Because you have the apron, typically is going to be the whole entire width of the garage, and then it's going to run anywhere between probably 2 feet to 5 feet, 4 or 5 feet out. I know this just because I had to have my apron replaced. Mine was asphalt. We have a 3-car garage, and we went out 2 feet. I think it only ended up costing us about $1,800, which I thought was decent for them to remove it, put it back in, and so forth. If it was concrete, I'd imagine I might be double or triple that amount pretty easily. But I, even on mine, could see where, you got to remember that whole garage floor sits on a foundation of some sort, right?
Correct.
Even underneath the garage doors, that whole floor is sitting on a foundation. So the last thing you want is for water and salt to continuously get down there and eat away at the concrete and undermine it too, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess the second to me is, it's the things that cover the exterior, it's the siding, and it's also like the roof. So talk to me a little bit about roofs and siding and what you're looking for as an inspector.
Yeah, so when it comes to roofs, we're looking for, general condition of the roof. We're looking for missing shingles. We're looking to see, are things flashed properly? Where the plumbing vent comes through, is that flashed properly, and is it in good condition? Because I've seen with plumbing vents, there's a rubber boot that goes around that pipe, and I've seen that rubber boot deteriorated or even missing in some situations.
Yeah, right.
So checking out the condition of the shingles and the flashing. Also looking for kickout flashing really isn't something that was a thing until around 2006, 2007.
It was just trying to divert the water away from the siding.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Right at the roof line, right? The siding is meeting the roof, and you're diverting the water away by having, it looks like a jog in the flashing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because without that, I have seen houses that, even houses that aren't stucco houses that have different kind of, like a cement
Cedar
board or
or
cedar.
yeah.
And like with cedar, you'll see that cedar rotting away because it's constantly getting hit with water. So kick-out flashing is an important thing to look for when we're checking out the roofs.
And then you're probably looking for like hail damage too, and
Yep.
seeing what that looks like,
Correct.
right? The severity of the hail damage, because just because a roof has a few marks from hail, I mean, we're in Minnesota, it's kind of the capital of hail, right?
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that the whole entire roof is bad.
Correct.
Right? You just want to understand that as being a buyer that's buying a home, right?
Yep.
And then siding, in and of itself, it just depends what you have, because for the longest time, in Minnesota, we used a product called Masonite, right?
Correct.
You talked a little bit about Masonite. We saw that on really homes that were built from probably the early 70s to maybe 90.
Yep.
Right?
So Masonite is a fiber board product. In concept was a great product.
As long as you keep it painted.
Painted and not too close to, say, a roof line or the ground.
Yep.
It really did not hold up to water well if it was getting a lot of water, where, too close to the ground, so a lot of water was splashing up on it all the
Yeah.
time, or
Yeah.
too close to a roof line where water
Yeah.
was running against it.
Yeah.
It didn't hold up well. There's a product out now called LP Smart Side,
Sure.
which
Yep.
in many regards is similar but improved.
Yep.
And that new product comes with a 50-year warranty.
Sure.
I personally am a big fan of that product.
Yeah.
I think it is a great product.
It's more of a cement board, though, right?
No, so LP Smart Side is actually a fiberboard product.
It's still a fiberboard. Okay.
Yep, it's a great product. Comes with a 50-year warranty, and it really was developed after knowing what the shortcomings of Masonite were.
But I think the whole thing too, and I don't really know this because it was before my time, but for the most part, Masonite didn't come pre-painted from the factory,
Correct.
right? Where the LP Smart Side, at very least, is coming pre-primed,
Correct.
and a lot of them are coming pre-painted.
Correct.
So they're baking that material on, whether it's the primer or the paint, at the manufacturer, and that's
Correct.
obviously, it'd be like painting your car yourself versus having it painted at the factory. Well, it's going to be a better product
Correct.
overall, right? So,
Yep.
along with improvements in technology and so forth, I'm sure what's happened along the way between Masonite and the LP Smart Side is just, there's the painting process is all done at a factory and baked
Correct.
on, so it's going to be just far superior as far
Correct.
as getting every corner, every nook and cranny of that siding covered. We've talked about driveways, we've talked about siding, we've talked about roofs a little bit. Maybe talk about sidewalks. Some of the issues that you see with sidewalks, and how can they be fixed, changed, so forth.
Yeah, so with sidewalks, obviously here in Minnesota, because of our temperature extremes, cement oftentimes gets cracks. You'll have some settling.
There's really two types of cement, right? Cement that's cracked and cement that's about to crack.
Correct.
Right? Yeah,
Yes.
because all cement really is gonna crack, right?
Correct.
And sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you used to be a builder. I mean, sometimes there's pre-stressed points where the builder actually says, "This is where I want it to crack." Right?
Correct. Yep.
So, when should I be concerned about cracking? Is there a general rule of thumb?
Yeah, so here's what I will tell you as far as cracks in cement. When it comes to a sidewalk, some cracks are going to be normal. In my opinion, when it should become a concern is it becoming a safety hazard?
Mm-hmm.
Is there settling?
Tripping hazard, right?
Exactly, where you're more likely to trip. Has the sidewalk settled in front of your stoop, where now instead of what should be a 7 3/4 inch rise, now you're a 10-inch rise.
Sure.
So you just have that much bigger of a step. And, it could be tripping, or say someone like my parents who are pushing 80 years
Sure.
old.
Yeah.
That extra few inches makes
The
it tougher
difference.
to get up the
Yeah,
steps.
right,
So
yeah.
knowing that some cracks are going to likely crack, once it becomes a safety hazard is when I think about it needing to be addressed.
So, and how do they fix it? Do I have to rip it all out?
You can. So there's different ways of going about doing it. You can rip it out. You can replace it with concrete. Mud jacking, or oftentimes now they use foam.
Yeah.
Where they'll drill holes in the concrete and they'll pump a foam underneath to raise it up.
Yeah.
Of course, love watching YouTube videos. You'll see videos nowadays where actually homeowners are drilling holes and getting cans of foam and doing it themselves.
Sure.
Not that can work in every situation, but
maybe in some.
In some situations.
Yeah. Interesting. Now we're inside. Let's kind of talk about maybe, what you're looking for inside, and ultimately, you're not really focusing a lot on cosmetic things, right? I mean, you note them and, right? Like a worn carpet, you might note it, or tears in the carpet, you might note it, or if you had laminate countertops or sheet vinyl flooring, you're probably noting if there's a tear or a stain. But, overall, you're there to look at the bones of the home more than anything, right?
Correct.
So if we start talking about like bones of the home, maybe we'll start from the top and we'll kind of go down, right? We've talked about the roof.
Yep.
Now maybe let's talk a little bit about attics and what you're seeing there, right?
So in an attic, when we go up there, oftentimes the bath fans are going to be vented through the attic and
but you used to be able to do that, right? That code allowed you at one point to vent into the attic space, right?
Yeah.
And then code changed.
Yep.
And code now doesn't allow you to do that, right?
Correct.
But the reason that it changed is we just got smarter over time, which is good, and we realized that you shouldn't put humid air into the attic space.
Correct.
And because it can create condensation and water and organic materials create this 4-letter word called mold.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
That nobody likes.
So check to see a couple things. One, is it vented out the roof like it should be? Two, is the venting insulated like it should be? If it's not,
you actually need insulation around that pipe, because if you don't have insulation around the venting pipe, you can get condensation because of the difference in air temperatures between what's going in the pipe and outside, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yep.
And then looking at roof sheathing, looking at rafters and or trusses, to check to see, are there signs that there's a leak going on, or signs that they've had a ventilation issue, or sometimes there's a cracked member of a truss. So
Sure.
I remember once I was up in an attic and they had a gas fireplace, and the trusses around the flue for the gas fireplace were all charred.
Oh my.
So sometimes you never know what you're going to see up in an attic.
Wow. Because they probably didn't, because most of those should be the double wall on the fireplace, and that might not have been a double wall, right?
And
more than likely it wasn't.
Correct.
Yeah, because that exterior wall, you should be able to touch it without being burnt, right? Because it's got that double wall there. What's the craziest thing that you've seen in an attic space?
Oh, craziest tricky. I've done, I don't know, probably 4,000 or 5,000 inspections. So sometimes
Sure.
it can get tough to pick out a tricky oddest. But yeah, I mean there are lots of potential issues in attics, and no one gets up there to see. I mean, oftentimes people live in a house for 20 years and never go up there.
One of the most costly things that I've heard, anyway, you say is if we have our furry friends.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And by furry friends, we typically mean mice, but I'm sure you've seen evidence of raccoons. I'm sure you've seen evidence of squirrels.
Correct.
And mice. So can you tell me about an instance where you've seen something with mice in the attic insulation? What does that look like?
Actually fairly common. You typically will see little burrow holes in the insulation, maybe some mouse droppings. If it's bats, typically...
Yeah, bats. Yeah.
We'll find the droppings concentrated in
an area,
in one area, because they're hanging from the ceiling. Literally, I've gone in attics and had multiple squirrels just staring at me while I'm up there. So.
It's like a standoff.
so yeah, and what can be tricky to get rid of rodents can be expensive,
right? Because
much more than you think.
Worst case scenario, you're sucking all the insulation out. You're fixing the residual damage that you have, because if they're defecating and urinating in the insulation, well, that can trickle into the sheetrock, which means you have to start redoing ceilings. I mean, that's really worst case scenario.
Correct.
I mean, probably even in 5,000 inspections, have you even seen a handful that required sheetrock removal? Maybe
No,
not.
no, I don't
Yeah,
think that's
you've
that bad.
probably never even
Right.
seen it, right?
Correct.
There is a chance that you could have to
Correct.
remove all that insulation, get new insulation, blown totally back in, right?
Absolutely.
So you got to be pretty careful on that. So, okay, we started, roof, attic. Now let's maybe move down and maybe bedrooms up there. So what are you looking at when you go into a bedroom, especially if you know that the roof is right above the room that you're in? Like, so what are you looking at for in there?
If we're in the second floor, we're looking for staining on the ceiling. We're looking for settling cracks. We're testing electrical outlets to make sure they're wired correctly. Smoke alarms. In Minnesota, you should have a smoke alarm in every bedroom, plus one on every level. You should have a carbon monoxide alarm within 10 feet of every bedroom. Now in Wisconsin, we also do inspections in Wisconsin.
Yep.
Carbon monoxide alarms are 21 feet from bedrooms, so slight variation there.
More cautious in Minnesota than Wisconsin, right?
I mean, it is interesting, the differences in what
the statutes say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would definitely say from a code standpoint, in many regards, Minnesota's requirements are tougher than Wisconsin. So, which is interesting, but at the same time, in Minnesota, home inspectors don't need to be licensed.
In Wisconsin, they do.
Right.
Yeah. We have totally. I'm licensed in Minnesota and Wisconsin, so I know we have totally different purchase agreements, and it's the Wisconsin purchase agreement is dramatically different compared to the Minnesota purchase agreement. I can't even tell you. They're night and day different, actually. So you're kind of probably looking for even staining, right? Especially
Correct.
if you know that the roof is right above it. Is there any staining and so forth?
And then, as we go around on, say, the second floor and we're checking bedrooms, obviously we're looking for staining. We're checking to make sure the windows are operable. We're looking to see, are there signs that windows have leaked? Are the windows operating okay? Are they locking okay? And what's the condition of the glass? Is it cracked? Is there signs that the seal is broken, so you're getting condensation in between the two panes?
Yeah, maybe it doesn't have two panes, right? I mean, it could. They could be really old windows and they're not thermopane.
Yep.
High levels of insulation versus the thermopane where they have the cracked glass in it. And I mean, on another video we'll talk about it, but I mean, we could start breaking down average costs at a very high level, but we're not going to do that here. But windows, depending on the house, I mean, you can be talking from a small Rambler where easy accessibility that you can go in and spend maybe $700-800 a window to you could have a huge 2-story that you easily could have $100,000 in Anderson windows, right? So it's pretty important to make sure that the windows are good.
My brother just recently got a quote for new Pillow windows in his house. It's about a 2,700 square foot 2-story plus a finished basement, walkout basement. The bid to replace all of his windows was $127,000.
Wow.
So it can get spendy.
Yep. Yeah. And I just did a flip where it was one of these Rambler houses, and I think we got everything done. I didn't do any of it myself, but I think we got everything done for $7,500. Right?
Okay. Yep.
So you can see there's drastic differences.
Correct.
So we kind of talked about sheetrock cracks. Can you explain a little bit of the difference between like a regular settling crack, if you will, versus maybe a crack that needs more investigation?
Yep. So when it comes to cracks, there can be lots of different scenarios, and oftentimes settling crack is a generalized term. It's not uncommon when you have, say, a vaulted ceiling for there to be a crack in the vault. And that isn't so much caused by settling, it's actually more caused by the movement of the trusses.
Expanding and contracting, right?
Correct.
Because in Minnesota we can be 30 degrees below zero air temperature, and we can be 105 degrees air temperature above zero, right?
Exactly. And the trusses are made of wood, and depending on the temperature, they will move based on what the temperature does. And that can cause cracking.
So a lot of times, basically with that cracking, it's not really a big deal. It's more of, have somebody that's qualified to look at it, give you an opinion. Worst case scenario, you might have to get another inspection, which be a structural engineer, right?
Correct.
To kind of come out and look at it. But typically that's not the case.
Correct.
That you need that additional inspection to come out there. I know general rule of my thumb that I've kind of had is, if I can take my fingers and drag it across it and it doesn't stop it,
Yep.
that it typically is not an issue. But the minute you get kind of that unevenness, especially if you get any more than maybe even like a 16th of an inch or something, right?
Exactly.
More than a 16th of an inch, something that would actually catch your fingers on. If it gets more than that, you probably should have it looked at.
Correct.
And I would say if the crack is more than probably of a 16th of an inch wide, right? Because that's different. A hairline crack versus a crack that's a 16th of an inch wide. That tells you that something really moved fairly substantially, right?
So when it comes to cracks, oftentimes builders, so I'm jumping from drywall to foundation just because we're talking cracks. Most builders don't consider a crack in a foundation a defect until it gets to at least 1/4 of an inch.
Okay. Yep. So I might be a little bit cautious then on my 16th, right? Yeah. Okay. But you got to be aware of it, and that's why you hire the right people, especially if you're not versed in construction. You definitely want to make sure you have another set of eyes and, maybe even ears, on the home. So now let's start continuing to move, down or around the house. Let's talk about a little bit about bathrooms. What are you seeing in bathrooms? Like, what should we be aware of?
So bathrooms, obviously, we're checking to make sure outlets are GFCI protected.
What does that mean?
So GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter. The premise is you have something plugged in. You want to have a GFCI outlet where things can get wet. A hairdryer plugged into an outlet. You've got the water running on the sink. Hairdryer falls in. It will trip the power on that outlet so that you don't get electrocuted.
Yeah.
So we're checking for GFCI protection. We're checking for leaks at the sinks. Toilets, we're checking to make sure that they're flushing. And we're also checking to make sure that they're securely set. I'll be honest with you, before I got into home inspections, I don't think I had any clue how many toilets there are out there that are not even attached. They're literally just sitting there.
Right? Yeah, they're just sitting on a wax ring. And
Correct.
Just nuts. So what's the weirdest thing that you've seen in a bathroom? Like, what's the craziest thing that you've seen?
Oh, I mean, as far as craziest things in a bathroom, I've seen some old bathrooms, and I think, what in the world were they thinking? Where literally you have bathtubs that you swear could fit 10 people. I mean, and you're like,
But some of it was before. Some of it, some of the houses that you're looking at were built before interior plumbing, right? I mean, because in Minnesota we have, quite and not a ton, but we have a lot of homes that were built pre-1900, especially if you get older parts of St. Paul, older parts of Minneapolis, but specifically St. Paul, you can have a lot of these pre-1900 homes, right? And then some of the outlying areas too, right? Because we can have these old farmsteads that were original and then, we can get in, we'll talk about foundations in a little bit, but, there can be some real crazy things with foundation where you're like, what's going on here? Not that it's not perfectly fine, because to be frank, that home stood for 130, 140 years on that foundation. But we'll talk about foundations a little because we're kind of working our way through the house. But I've seen houses where all of a sudden they got a hot water line hooked up to the toilet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
and that's something that's really probably not easily fixable, right?
Correct.
It's there and it's just going to happen. And what do you do?
I mean, to fix it, you're having to open up walls, tie into the cold and run a new line. So, that can be a pain. Yeah. It's interesting when it comes to, say, older houses, say early 1900s. It's very common to have what's called an S-trap. Where the pipe isn't vented like they are required today.
So you're talking about the plumbing, the sewage part of the plumbing, right?
Exactly. So today for the waste line, we should have a P-trap.
Yep.
It's not uncommon in
And why is that
houses.
there?
So P-trap is there to hold water to prevent sewer gases from coming up out of the sink, and
Or it could be in a drain in the floor in the basement too, right?
correct.
Yep.
Or
Or
tub
even in,
or what.
or even in, even in your laundry room, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yep.
so like ideally, I know, like, especially in cabin country, when I'm not at my cabin for a period of time and I haven't used my washing machine, or I know that I have a couple floor drains, I'll actually take like a cup of water and I'll pour it in those floor drains
Yep.
to make sure that I'm not getting any residual sewer gas
Correct.
come up. And especially if you had a second home or a cabin like that, you'll know, because you walk in and be like, it smells like a baby diaper, right?
Right, exactly.
And a lot of times, nothing to be really concerned about other than the water that was in that P trap basically evaporated. But,
Right.
in the old homes, they had the S trap, and that was probably, I don't know, but it's probably cold when it was put in, potentially, right?
Yep.
Because there wasn't the P traps. But talk to me about that, because you can have venting issues, and how hard is it to fix the venting issues, and why do they need to be vented?
Correct. So with an S trap, the water is more likely to get siphoned out, so you don't have that water sitting in the trap,
Yep.
and sewer gases are more likely to come up.
Yep.
Again, here's a Wisconsin, Minnesota difference. In Wisconsin, you can install what's called an air admittance valve, and then you don't have to vent it out the roof.
That's code.
And that's code in Wisconsin.
Wow.
So you can do that, and that works completely fine. In Minnesota, air admittance valves don't meet code. It should be vented, tied into the plumbing vent, and vented out the roof. So in Minnesota, to do it per code is a lot more work. Air admittance valves work.
Yeah.
Just that somebody at the state of Minnesota said, we don't want to use them.
Okay. Fair enough. So now let's maybe go down to, let's get into like a living room area where we could have a fireplace. It might be a wood fireplace. It might be a gas fireplace. Can you talk about, to me, like, what are you seeing with wood fireplaces, gas fireplaces? Like, what are you looking out for? Like, what's like the worst case scenario is seeing with some of these things?
All right. So as far as a fireplace goes, if it's a wood burning fireplace, you should have a hearth that's at least 16 inches deep.
Why do I need that?
The idea is, let's say you have an ember or
Like a hot piece of the wood
that
that pops and it
comes
comes out.
out.
Hopefully it doesn't go past that and it sits on that hearth and it doesn't start your carpet on fire, right?
correct, or a log falls out.
It's
so
on fire. Yeah.
the 16 inches is what it is supposed to be.
Sure.
Then want to check the condition of the firebox out.
For the wood.
Where the wood sits, to look to see, is the firebox in good shape? Are there bricks cracked? Or is there missing mortar? Is there things that can allow the fire to get beyond where it should be?
Yep.
Then at the top of the firebox is your damper door. You have the damper door closed when you're not having a fire, open when you are to let the smoke out. So is the damper door working okay?
Yep.
Then you open up the damper door and you can look into the smoke chamber.
Yep.
Now, years ago, smoke chambers, that's basically a way of tapering the width of the firebox down to the width of the flue.
Okay.
They do that by kind of laying a row of bricks and then having another brick overhang that one, and then the next one overhang it. Today, you're supposed to parge your smoke chambers. That wasn't always the case.
What does that mean to me?
Spreading mortar over the bricks. So rather than having the steps of all the bricks, you have a nice, smooth incline.
Because I'm guessing as the wood burns, you get residue that actually collects on those steps, and that residue on those steps potentially could create a chimney fire, right?
Yep. So what it is, by having it smooth, it reduces the chance of there being turbulence in the smoke.
Sure.
The more turbulence, the greater there is a chance of creosote buildup.
Yeah.
And then also the mortar that they use for the parging helps to keep the brick cooler. So it acts twofold.
And that's why you got to make sure you're getting the right type of firewood too for your fireplace, especially, it's one thing to have a bonfire and, burn your pine, burn whatever you want to work, burn your birch, but when you're having a fire inside your house, you really should be doing your oaks, your maples.
Correct.
Right? And in Minnesota, for the most part, it's going to be oak that people are going to be burning, because you start burning these woods that have more creosote in the wood, right?
Yep.
Just by their nature, because like pine has got the pine tar in it, and
Correct.
so the last thing you want to do is burning pine in your fireplace that's
Right.
inside your house, right?
Correct.
Okay.
When we're looking at the outside of the chimney, we're looking to see what kind of condition is the brick in, what condition is the crown in. There's one additional inspection that can be done that's not part of a standard home inspection. That's a level 2 chimney inspection.
Okay.
That's sending a camera up the flue to look at the inside of the flue as it goes up. Masonry wood burning fireplaces tend to have issues.
Sure.
So if someone has a masonry wood burning fireplace that they plan to keep and use as a wood burning fireplace, getting a level 2 is a good idea.
Because like, talk to me a little bit about costs. Like, let's say that we need to fix the firebox. We need to fix, stuff beyond the flue. I mean, like, how much money are we, just general, like, how much money in general are we looking at?
So I would guess on the low end for most masonry wood burning fireplaces, if they haven't had a liner installed, there's a fair chance it's going to need some repair. In which case...
What do you mean by a liner?
Oh, all right. So most masonry wood burning fireplaces have a terracotta liner in it.
Okay.
And those are made of clay, and they're typically a foot to 18 inches per section. In between each section is mortar to kind of seal it.
Yeah.
But over time, that mortar deteriorates, cracks, falls
Sure.
out. And so there's a few different things you can do if it's got cracks or missing mortar. They can use a product where they drop a hose down, and as they pull it up, it's spraying mortar.
Really?
Or a sealant on
Wow.
the inside of the flue to seal those cracks. The other option is having a stainless steel liner installed inside of the existing terracotta liner.
Really?
It's not uncommon where a masonry wood burning fireplace, the bill to fix it runs $5,000 to $10,000.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I'll be honest with you, I'm a big fan of gas fireplaces. If I
Sure.
bought a house with a wood fireplace, more than likely I'm going to be having a gas insert put into
Sure.
its place. So then I probably wouldn't worry. I wouldn't spend the money to have a level 2 done.
Yeah, you can convert a lot of those, and I mean, to get a really nice gas insert installed, $6,000.
Yeah.
For really good
Yeah.
quality though, right?
Yep.
Like something that's going to put out a bunch of heat. It's going to have logs that really look real. So
Correct.
90% of the time, you can take the wood, turn it to gas.
Correct.
But you can't go from gas to wood easy.
Correct.
It gets to be very hard.
Exactly.
Because I've had some clients look into that. I know it gets pretty difficult. Let's go to the kitchen. Like, what are we looking for in a kitchen? What are you seeing in kitchens? What are the big things to look for in kitchens?
Yeah, so kitchens, obviously, we're checking for GFCI protected outlets. We're checking for leaks at the sinks to make sure the drain pipes are pitched properly so they're sloped towards.
Anywhere that you have a water source, you're looking for leaks, right, in that
Correct.
kitchen? Okay.
Yep. We're checking kitchen appliances. How old are they? What kind of condition are they in? Are they working? And then cabinets. Cabinet doors, are they operating or do they close? Sometimes you'll have a door that you can shut, but it just pops open, or a drawer that you open and it just kind of falls out.
Yep.
So plumbing, electrical, appliances, and cabinetry.
All that, yep. So I mean, really, like water sources, you want to make sure, like the fridge, because a lot of fridges have water in them.
Correct.
Make sure that that's working right. You do see quite a few homes that have damage as a result of dishwashers, right,
Correct.
and improperly installed water lines, sewage lines. There's some high-end homes that have, that pot filler that's,
Correct.
making sure that you're looking for kind of leaks there. And then from there, I mean, you get real fancy. You have these built-in, coffee making machines that are in the wall. I mean, I know some of this stuff you
Correct.
don't really look at because you don't see it a lot, but
Right.
there's various things that you really should look for in that kitchen. What's the strangest thing that you've seen in a kitchen that you're like, wow, how did that happen?
I'll be honest with you, I see so many things that just shock me that it's hard to rank them. What would be the strangest thing?
We continue, throughout the house. Let's talk about laundry rooms. Like, what are you seeing in laundry rooms? What should a person be aware of in a laundry room?
Okay, so obviously dryer, as far as venting goes, want to make sure the venting is done properly.
And what does that mean to be done properly?
Yeah, so, when it comes to dryer venting, in Minnesota, the dryer venting should be rigid and metal.
Yep.
Now you are allowed up to 8 feet of transitional
Really?
venting where you can.
Which has to be aluminum.
It has to be metal.
Yep.
Yep. So any vinyl venting.
Yeah, back in the day, they actually sold the vinyl venting, which was
Correct.
like crazy to me, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has to be metal. Once it goes into a wall or a ceiling, then it has to be rigid.
Rigid. Yeah,
Correct.
because in the event that there is a lint fire inside of it,
Yep.
hopefully it's going to prevent the spread of fire to anywhere else besides inside of the pipe,
Correct.
right?
Yep. And then obviously water again, so we're wanting to make sure we have GFCI protection. We're wanting to, oftentimes laundry rooms have sinks, so we're checking for leaks there.
Yep.
And then, are the washer and dryer working okay? Are there signs that there have been leaks in the past?
Sure. Just looking for leaks. Leaks is a common theme with water. Okay. Now we're going to transition down to either the utility room or otherwise the basement. So let's go down there and talk about what we're seeing, in utility rooms, and maybe let's start off first and foremost with like the electrical panel, right? It seems like that seems to be the thing that everybody's the most concerned about or scared about. So let's kind of talk about electrical panels. Let's talk about old school electrical panels, and let's talk about maybe stuff that was 20 years old, and then let's talk about the most recent, because there's definitely been some code changes recently, especially with brand new construction.
Correct.
So let's run the gamut from those old ones to kind of 3 different styles.
So obviously you've got very old fuses, not breakers.
Yep, and fuses, they're porcelain. They have a copper piece with a little bit of solder in the middle, and you get a surge, and fairly old. We're seeing them pre-1960. Is kind of like a rule of thumb that you start seeing fuses,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Or you could. Someone could have totally retrofitted it and
Exactly.
done.
Obviously, one of my biggest issues with fuses, people not understanding if a fuse breaks, they've got to replace it with the exact same kind of fuse. For a lot of people, having a fuse panel is very intimidating. Making sure they've used the right type of fuse with the right amperage. It can be a pain, if you have a fuse blow, and then what if you don't have it? Now you've got to...
Yeah, because it's not as simple as tripping the breaker back
Correct.
and forth, right? Because you had the porcelain ones, you had, I think there's like type S, type F or something. Those the porcelain ones versus the ones that have the copper in them. And so you got to be fairly careful with it. Okay, let's go towards a little bit more of like that 60s to probably like 2000, and what do those panels look like?
Yeah, there are some older panels that are breakers, that, like say a Pushmatic, where the breakers, rather than flipping back and forth, these would pop out and then you'd have to push them in. Works, but you might have a hard time finding new breakers if you need it, because they don't make it anymore. And then you've got your breaker panels that you've got a few brands that are considered problematic, like your Federal Pacific and your Zinscos.
And typically those breakers, they were fairly colorful, so that's like one of the leading signs, right? Like, instead of just being like the black breaker that's got the white writing on it, they were like gray and purple or gray and pink and red, right?
Yep. So the Zinscos would be like a baby blue and a red, and definitely very colorful. So that's very easy to identify.
There wasn't really a ton of homes that actually burned down because of this, but there was enough where basically if you have these in your house, it's a good idea to get them replaced. And like for panels right now, they're pretty expensive, right?
Correct.
You're seeing really between like 5 at the low end, depending on the amperage, to probably 10, right?
It's interesting.
And we're talking 5,000 to 10,000,
it's interesting. Probably 4 years ago, you probably could get a panel changed for $2,000.
Yeah, $2,000 to $3,000, right?
Yeah. And now they're $5,000.
Yeah.
So like you said, depending on your amperage. The thing with electrical panels now and as we go into the future, a person, in 1960 didn't have phone chargers and,
They have all
nowadays,
these high-end appliances, right? I mean, the high-end appliance in 1950 would have been, hey, we got a washing machine, right?
Right.
Or, and now it's like, whoa, we got all of these PlayStations and these expensive TVs and, all this stuff that we want to protect. So let's talk about the new panels. Like, how are we protecting all of this high-end appliances, and what are we seeing in the newest plant panels that are being installed today?
Yeah, so panels installed today, they all have, if it's a new construction, last couple of years, it's been required to have a surge protector on the panel versus, buying the strips that had the surge protectors that you would plug your TV into and stuff. So the panels now are required to have surge protectors. The panels now, you used to have a main shutoff in the panel. Now it's required to have a main shutoff out at the electric meter before it even comes into the house.
Wow.
So some people have opened up their panels and been like, where's my main breaker? It's outside at the panel.
And now with the panels, they it's not only just arc faults, right? They also have, what's the newest breaker that we have out right now?
Well, so, in panels now, I'll be honest with you, if I go back to, say, 2004, arc faults just started to become a thing, and you would only have arc faults pretty much just on bedroom circuits.
Okay, sure.
Now almost every circuit in the house is required to be arc faulted, as well as almost every circuit they have are to be GFCI protected in many cases.
Sure.
So
the breakers got way more expensive is a lot of the problem with this, right? Instead of it being a $4 or $5 breaker, for your average, 15 amp.
It's a $70 breaker.
It's a $70 breaker. So all of a sudden those breakers got much more expensive. So let's talk about the wiring that goes into the panels, right?
Yep.
Because, there was wiring that was used 1900. There was wiring, unfortunately, that was used from the mid 50s to the mid 70s. And then we have, the Romex wiring that's typically used today. Talk to me a little bit about knob and tube. That's always been, as a person that flips some houses here and there, I know it can get really expensive. We still see it, which is shocking to me. So tell me a little bit about knob and tube. What is it? Explain it to the people that are watching.
So knob and tube wiring, basically you would run two separate wires. One was the hot wire, one was the neutral wire. They didn't run ground wires. The way they ran knob and tube and the way it got its name is they would have tubes that the wires would run through as they went through joists, and then the knobs where they would be attached to a knob.
Porcelain knobs, right?
Porcelain knobs to support them. Knob and tube, depending on who you talk to from an electrician standpoint. Some will say, we'll install for outlets, we'll install GFCI outlets. There's not a ground wire run, so we're just going to install a GFCI outlet. Those are considered to be safe for personal use when they're ungrounded, but offer no equipment protection. Because it can be expensive if you're looking at removing all the knob and tube and rewiring the whole house.
If you have to rewire a whole house, you're cutting holes into the sheetrock or many times the plaster, right? Because it's plaster instead of sheetrock in those homes for the most part, unless they've been remodeled. So now we got a $10,000 panel potentially, and I know the bills that I've had have been anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 to get rid of all the knob and tube, and that doesn't include the reconstruction.
Right.
Fixing the walls, painting the walls.
Yep.
And I think no matter what kind of condition the knob and tube is in, ultimately when you go to resell that house and someone has an inspection, it's going to come up that it's knob and tube. And quite frankly, there's a lot of insurance companies that won't even give you insurance if you have any knob and tube, right?
Correct.
So
exactly.
That's the thing that you got to be, even if you are like, oh, okay, I'm going to buy this house, you might not be able to get insurance on it, and then all of a sudden you're there, oh great, I got somewhere between a $15,000 and a $25,000 bill, not including reconstruction to fix those walls, so it can get really expensive. Now I know from doing this a long time, I've also run into, not as much, but I've ran into aluminum wire in the entire house. Tell me a little bit about aluminum wiring.
So aluminum wiring, there was a time period from say mid 40s to 1960, where it became much more common to use aluminum wiring because it was less expensive.
Instead of copper.
Correct, because it was less expensive.
Yep.
And typically the wiring that we're talking about that was problematic was on your, it was single strand aluminum on your 15 to 20 amp circuits.
Yep.
Okay.
So most of your circuits in your house.
Correct.
Yep.
And what would happen is that aluminum would crack and could cause arcing. Also, the connections aren't as good.
Because aluminum is just a lot softer than copper, right?
Correct.
And so that gets to be the problem. Like they would set the screws on the connections and,
Correct.
It would compress it, and over time it would just move enough that you're getting the arcing there.
Correct.
Where you can still get it with the copper, but it's not as prevalent just because copper is harder
Correct.
than most aluminum, right?
Yep.
At least the wiring in a house
Yep.
that we're talking about.
Now, that being said, even today in new construction, most main lines coming from
Or aluminum.
are aluminum coming from.
But they're multiple strand.
They're multiple strand. Those are typically aluminum, and then oftentimes your range or your dryer are also aluminum.
Sure. Yep.
So
because aluminum, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm no electrician, and to be really transparent, throughout this whole entire thing, if you're looking for a plumber, you're looking for an electrician, you're looking for an HVAC, there are licensed trades that you definitely can go for all this information. We're just kind of giving you high level information here.
Yep.
Because neither Andy or I are any of those. We can put you in contact with some trusted partners if you need help with that, but what we see, is it's really a buyer beware, and that's why you need to make sure you get all these inspections done. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about furnaces, HVAC furnaces. Minnesota, for the most part, it's almost all forced air.
Yep.
We do have some radiant heat in older homes, which basically means that your house is heated by a boiler that pumps the water through the radiators with a pump. That's fairly older homes, right? That's probably 1930 back.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I would say most common was pre-30s. There's some where I'd see it even into the 60s.
Okay.
And then when it comes to boilers, so my house 1920.
Sure.
My boiler is original 1920 boiler.
Still kicking. They don't make it like they used to, right? Yeah, nice.
Yeah, so you never know how long something's going to last.
Yep.
Today, if you see a boiler, there's going to be a pump, the boiler's going to heat it. There's going to be a pump that pushes the water through the whole system.
Yeah.
At my house, I don't have a pump. It's just done based on, the hot water going up
and the cold
and
water.
the cold coming down.
Yeah.
Hot water heat can be a great way to go.
And now they do in floor, right? You have like Uponor is probably a big name that's out there, or Wurzbo is another big name that's out there, and basically that's running water lines either on top of flooring or it's running them through a cement pad, and it can be, if done correctly, it can be one of the most efficient ways to heat a home.
Correct.
Even with your home that was built with the radiators, the nice thing is you probably have very limited dust in your house, right?
Correct.
Right? Because unless you're using AC in the summer, you're not circulating that air through the house because you're not blowing it or it's not a forced air system.
Yep.
Probably 80+% of the homes, maybe even 90+% of the homes in Minnesota are going to be a forced air. So like, what are you seeing with a forced air system?
When it comes to a forced air system, it's one of those things where, we're checking to see, is it working? How old is the system? Is it working properly? Literally, I did an inspection about a month ago. Furnace was brand new. I mean, it had only been in there a couple months. But it was not working correctly.
Really?
Walked in the house, the thermostat was set to 70, it was 60 in the house. I kicked it up a few degrees. It did turn on, but then it shut off at 62 and didn't want to turn back on. And that was just a brand new one. And ultimately the error code that it was giving was saying that it had a dirty flame sensor, and that just, even though it was new, it
still can go bad, right?
Correct.
Right.
So checking to make sure that the furnaces are working properly. Are there condensation leaks?
Cracked heat exchanger is probably the biggest one, right? Because you're not really practically, you're not replacing. If it has a cracked heat exchanger in the furnace or a cracked burner, you're not replacing that. It's just time to get a new furnace at that
Correct.
point, right?
Right. Now, with that, depending on the furnace, that's not something that can always be seen during a inspection without partially dismantling the furnace.
Yep. So next, maybe let's talk a little bit about water heaters. For the most part, we have electric water heaters, we have gas water heaters, and then we have tankless water heaters that could be electrical or gas.
Yep.
Right? So what are you seeing with water heaters?
So, water heaters, looking to see if it's atmospherically vented. Is the venting sloped
Meaning
properly?
that it's got a vertical vent, a vertical and semi, horizontal, but mostly vertical vents.
Correct.
Yep.
So you've got your power vented that has a fan that's basically
Pushing it out.
pushing the exhaust out. Typically, it's through a PVC pipe.
Yep.
A atmospherically vented, it's just using just
Gravity.
gravity. Yeah.
Yep.
The hot air going up.
Yep.
And because of that, it always is supposed to have rise to it. But sometimes people don't really pay attention. Water heaters, you can get different height water heaters, and they'll get one that's taller than the old one, and now the vent pipe doesn't rise the way it's supposed to.
It didn't have that initial kind of rise where it got moving and then went the rest of the way because
Correct.
they changed kind of maybe the thermodynamics, if you will, of how it's actually working.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then you've got tankless water heaters, which actually some of the tankless water heaters can be a combination of a water heater and a in-floor heat.
In-boiler,
heater,
yep,
so a
yep.
combination for a
Yep.
boiler where it does both. Tankless are great. They typically require a little more maintenance. You're supposed to annually descale it. So that's...
Are you draining the water there? What are you doing
So
to descale?
you're shutting off the water, and then basically you would get a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with vinegar, put a pump in the 5-gallon bucket, run a hose from the pump into your water heater and out of your water
Sounds like
heater.
you would do with a coffee maker, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like what you have to do with a coffee maker.
Okay, yeah.
And that's just to get the scale build up the inside.
Huh?
So.
Wow, that's crazy. So I guess last but not least, let's kind of talk about foundations. And, Minnesota, we probably really see 4 foundation types, if I'm being frank. We'll see the block, where it looks like Lego blocks and they kind of stack on each other. We'll see what's called a poured foundation, right, where they basically come in with forms and they fill those forms and they pour it and they remove the forms. We'll see the wood foundation, which happens very infrequently. It's for sure probably less than 0.5% of homes out there.
Yep.
And then we'll also see field stone foundations too, and occasionally I guess we'll probably have a 5th, which is like the brick, and your 6th I guess might actually be like the stacked like limestone foundations instead of the field stone. So we threw out 6. I thought there was 4, but then once I started going through my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, we actually have a few more here. So let's talk about them quickly. Let's talk about your cinder block foundations.
Yep. So cinder block foundations are good foundations. Today we do much more core filling of those if we're doing a block foundation.
Meaning that you're putting the Legos together, and then because they have holes in them, you're pouring concrete on the top, and the concrete's finding its lowest point, and it's kind of a hybrid, if you will.
Correct.
Yep.
So that wasn't always the case where we'd core fill them. So when we weren't core filling them, they were much more apt to
moving,
leaning in. So that's something, if it's a block foundation, we're looking for horizontal cracks. We're looking for is the walls
kind of the same rule of thumb too, right? Like if you see movement that's probably greater than 1/4 inch, or you see any cracking that's greater than 1/4 inch, that's where you really should, you could have an issue. And then with the bowing, sometimes it's hard to tell. There are some other telltale signs if you have foundation issues throughout the rest of the house, right?
Yep.
Because the foundation is key, and you'll see cracking in the sheetrock and other things and other types of settling, maybe windows not opening, things like that, doors not opening correctly.
Yep.
Let's talk about the poured. The poured are probably the most used, right? Like it seems like every builder now pretty much has gone to poured. What are you seeing with poured foundations?
I'll be honest with you, if I were to build a house, I wouldn't do anything but a poured foundation nowadays.
Yeah, me neither.
A big fan of poured foundations.
Yep.
Much less susceptible to have issues. Not to say that they can't have an issue, much less likely. I'll give you some examples. I had mentioned that typically a builder doesn't consider a crack in a foundation to be a defect unless it's more than 1/4 of an inch. And typically that holds true. The waterproofing that they use, when the foundation cracks, the waterproofing actually has a certain amount of stretch to it, so that oftentimes the crack doesn't go all the way through. But every once in a while I have seen new foundations where there's a crack that doesn't exceed 1/4 of an inch, but it still will let water through.
Wow.
So, and typically then you'll see some staining, some signs that there's water coming through.
But overall, poured probably really the way to go. If you
Correct.
core filled the cinder block, I guess, I'm probably fine with that too, but I'm trying to go with the poured.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about wood. We see them here and there.
Yep.
Typically, there's some very telltale signs of having a wood foundation. Having all the interior walls finished, including the utility room, is a fairly telltale sign. Now, from what I've been told, the wood that they use is not maybe the same wood that you would use to build a deck, right? It's pressure treated lumber, but it's specific for foundation use, and it has like 5 times the amount of chemicals or something in it. But tell me what you've seen with wood. We don't see them very often, but I probably wouldn't personally buy one, because I know when I go to resell it, there's going to be a stigma around it that the next person doesn't want the wood foundation. So tell me what you're seeing with wood.
Yeah, so wood foundations are not super common around here.
Yep.
I think my feeling on wood foundations is similar to yours. Premise on why some people like wood foundations is they tend to give you a warmer basement than a concrete basement. And a wood foundation can be a good foundation if it's done correctly. But the margin for error on a wood foundation
slim, right?
is very small. Okay. So you have a much greater margin for error on a concrete foundation if it's not done 100% right.
Remember, we got wood. I've been told that the wood foundations, and I'm just taking for what I can remember, but they're like 100-year for sure, easily. And I've always kind of thought to myself, give me your piece of wood, I'll bury it in the ground, and I'll take my piece of concrete and bury it in the ground. We'll come back in 100 years and we'll see which one of them is left. I'm going to bet on the concrete for sure.
Correct.
I'm not sure that I'm going to bet on the wood. Now, we're not talking bad about wood, so don't flame us, but there's very few of them. So let's move on to like the less common types. We do see some brick in various forms. It can be from small bricks all the way up to, larger size bricks.
Yep.
Typically, we're seeing that in this Minneapolis or St. Paul, right?
Correct. Yeah, and we'll see it. Usually, it's rare that it's an entire basement. We'll see it in, a section here or a section there. Usually it's in conjunction with another type of foundation. Bricks typically don't hold up as well as
they get blistering and things of that nature,
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So have I seen brick foundations hold up? Absolutely.
Yeah, some of them have been held up for 130 years, right, at this point.
And it kind of jumps back to one thing I said earlier. Making sure you have good drainage
helps with everything, right? No matter what type of foundation you have. Drainage is key, right?
Correct.
Especially in Minnesota, because your biggest challenge is really hydraulic pressure, especially from the freezing of the water. As that water comes down next to the house, and you get a lot of water in the springtime, especially where you can have these thaws and freeze cycles. It's just like the roads, right? That's why our roads get so bad, is because of all the water. It really has nothing to do with the salt. It has to do with these thaw and freeze cycles, and that's the same thing. That's why you have to get the water away from the house, because ideally you don't want that freezing and contracting and constantly going on, because eventually it's not going to be good. All right, let's go to the final couple types of foundations. We'll have like the limestone, especially like some of the grand houses on Grand Avenue, on Summit Avenue. We'll see them out on some farmhouses here and there. What's your feeling on like a limestone?
So limestone can be a great foundation. Much more common to have some seeping of water in a limestone foundation. The other part, when it comes to a foundation, limestone is a softer material than cement.
Sure.
Okay. And so when they do a limestone foundation, they often would use a lime-based mortar.
Okay.
The lime mortar is going to deteriorate faster than the limestone.
Sure.
Okay.
So you'd be doing tuck pointing and keeping up on it, right?
Correct. It's more of a maintenance thing because it was made where the mortar would deteriorate so that the limestone didn't.
Sure.
And so then when it comes to tuck pointing, you don't want to use a cement-based mortar because that's going to be harder than the foundation, the limestone, and so you don't want the limestone now to become the weak part of the foundation.
Yeah.
So limestone can be a good foundation, but it typically requires more maintenance.
So last but not least, and I still personally, I know, I think I own one investment property that's fieldstone.
Yep.
So tell me about a fieldstone foundation and tell me where the name was derived from and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously fieldstone is stones that came out of the field.
Yeah.
You know, farmers, as they would plow their fields, they typically just take the stones and pile them up in one corner of their field. And then people would take the stone and use it to build
barn foundations.
Correct.
They would use it to build home foundations.
Correct.
And then you're basically using, some sort of cement mortar, in between those to hold them together for the most part. And yeah, I mean, and again, they're rocks, and a lot of them are going to be granite rocks, right? And I mean, they can be good for forever, right?
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, because you're using a natural product. Lots of information on foundations. Typically 95+% of the time you're going to see either your poured or you're going to see your block foundation. Probably the last thing maybe we can touch on, and I know it makes buyers nervous and sometimes makes sellers angry. We see this terminology in inspection reports. So let's say past its useful life. So tell me a little bit about, you put this in your inspection, I got buyers getting nervous, I got sellers getting mad at me because they're saying that it works. So when it says it's past its useful life, tell me a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so everything in a house has an anticipated life.
Sure.
Okay, and obviously the things that are most commonly called out for nearing the end of their anticipated life is going to be your kitchen appliances, your laundry appliances, furnace, water heater, AC. As I mentioned earlier, my boiler is 105 years old.
So that's probably past its useful life, right?
Right. You figure a boiler should last maybe 30 to 40 years is kind of what you would expect for a boiler.
Yeah.
So mine's been passed for,
probably
70,
80
years. When it's in a report, we're not saying this thing is going to die tomorrow and needs to get replaced.
It's just kind of like a CYA, right?
Right.
You're putting it in there like, hey, I got to let the consumer beware that this thing, although it may be working perfectly fine, and it might work for another 50 years.
Right.
It's past its useful life, so it's basically like making the buyer aware of it. But it's not saying that it actually doesn't work and it couldn't work for a long period of time, right?
Right. Whenever I have bought a house, I am a big fan of home service plans.
Sure.
And I don't know, some people do home warranties, some people do home service plans.
Especially for the first year, right?
Correct.
Really get to put like a home warranty or a home service plan on it for the first year because you don't know what's going to happen. And that first year as a new homeowner, you're going to have the most outlay of cash that you probably will, other than if you're doing remodels, right? Because, you're fixing stuff up and so it's good to have those plans because they can help mitigate a lot of the costs, whether the warranty or the home service plan that you get through like Mini Gasco or Centerpoint or one of those, or Excel. There's quite a few, probably 5 big home warranty companies, and usually can get your average size house covered for anywhere between that low end of probably $650, high end of a home warranty is going to take you up to maybe $1,000, right? Anything else you have? We've gone over a lot here, Andy. We've talked a ton. Anything else you want to add before we end this?
No, I think we've covered most everything.
We've covered a lot.
Yeah.
We probably could have gone into
Yeah.
detail a lot more. So again, I'm Jason Huerkamp with Living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is Andy with Everest Home Inspections. Whether you're buying or selling in anywhere in the Twin Cities or Western Wisconsin, we can help you out with anything that you're looking for your real estate needs. Andy can help you out with most of your inspection needs. If by chance you it's a service that Andy doesn't provide, well, he has, the people that'll help you with the well and septic or those type of inspections. So again, I'm Jason Huerkamp, and we will see you at the next house.